There is a new federal effort to crack down on ghost guns. The feds are taking aim at certain parts used to make these virtually untraceable weapons that are linked to crimes across our area.
Our CBS News investigative correspondent Stephen Stock joins us with more. Stephen, good evening.
Dick, Christine, good evening. 1 week from today, August 24th, new federal rules will effectively ban unserialized parts and kits that are used to make ghost guns are in every state around the country. But we found these new rules have apparently unleashed a flood in the market for these untraceable firearms.
The actual work is pretty easy.
To find out just how easy it is to make a ghost gun,
This is blank.
we visited Bob and Hugh in a garage in California's Central Valley, where they've been building these homemade guns for years as a hobby. They ask us to withhold their last names because they fear backlash.
The whole process takes about an hour and a half.
They showed us how they take what to most of us looks like a gun part,
Magazine release.
but under current federal law is regarded as just a hunk of metal, a paperweight.
This is what it ends up looking like.
And within an hour or so, on the garage workbench, turn it into a working homemade firearm, just like one from a manufacturer. The only difference? Most privately made firearms created this way have no serial numbers, almost no way to trace them if they are later used in a crime, earning the name ghost guns.
Another AR-15 lower receiver.
You can buy an unserialized ghost gun part legally with only a credit card and an address in most states. For now, we know because we did it.
Okay, we shall see.
Bob and Hughes started putting serial numbers on all the guns they make starting in 2018, when a California law began requiring ghost gun registration there. Rules that will soon extend to every state as the federal government plans to mandate serial numbers on all relevant gun parts used to make homemade firearms. They'll also require anyone who buys these parts to submit to a background check.
They're going to be discouraging people from going out and participating in this hobby.
But multiple law enforcement sources tell us the new rules aren't meant to target hobbyists. They're intended to stop those who produce guns to sell to criminals who otherwise couldn't get a gun legally. The number of ghost guns or privately made firearms recovered and traced by law enforcement from crime scenes since 2016 has exploded nationwide, 1,000%.
It is very troubling.
Charlie Patterson, special agent in charge at ATF's Washington, D.C. Field Division, says untraceable guns lead to more crimes they can't solve.
Here in the district, 41% of all privately made firearms that are recovered linked to another shooting.
Numbers that could go up. CBS News has found that there's a rush to sell off these soon-to-be regulated gun parts. A fire sale, so to speak. Does that worry you?
That is a concern for all law enforcement.
Matthew Verisco is special agent in charge of ATF's Philadelphia Field Division.
We have cases in Pennsylvania related to individuals that are trying to unload their inventory.
Is it really going to be effective enough?
Any tool that can be utilized by law enforcement to help solve violent crime will be effective.
Bob and Hughes say they don't believe the new rules will reduce violent crime anyway.
It's not going to work because it's the same thing. Criminals don't obey the law.
As for that part that we ordered online, well, here it is. An AR-15 lower 80. No serial number, no way to trace it, and for now, in most states, all perfectly legal. That's especially important there in New York City, where there's been a 1,400% increase in the number of ghost guns seized there just in the last few years. Police believe they could see another record by the end of 2022. I'm investigative correspondent Stephen Stock. Dick, Christine, back to you.
Stephen, unbelievable. And we want to welcome you to our team as an investigative correspondent, not just for us, but all of the CBS stations.
Yeah, and for our viewers at home, look for Stephen to file some impactful reports here in our future. We're certainly excited to be working with you, Stephen.
Looking forward to it.
All right, thanks very much, Stephen. And as you know, we've been covering ghost guns and their impact in our area. To get an inside look at the NYPD gun library and to see ghost guns confiscated over the years, go to cbsnewyork.com. CBS 2 political reporter Marcia Kramer spoke to Stephen about the ease of getting gun parts and about more potential unintended consequences of the new laws.
Stephen, thank you so much for joining us today. You know, Stephen, ghost guns are a really big problem here in the tri-state area. You know, I've done a lot of reporting on the issue, and you've done a lot of reporting nationally across the country on this story. So my first question to you is, how easy is it to buy the parts to make a ghost gun, and are they expensive?
Well, great question, Marcia. I got to tell you, it's extremely easy. In fact, we did it. We just went online. You can find as many as 40, 50 different online sites selling these parts for ghost guns. Most of them are called 80% lowers. We ordered one online from a company out of Ormond Beach, Florida. Got it in the mail a couple days later. This is it. And it looks like a gun. Clearly, it's a part for a gun, right? The barrel goes here. The trigger goes here. The difference is, under the current federal law, now this is going to change a week from today, as you see all of this, that's just metal, right? That makes this a hunk of metal, according to federal law. It's a paperweight. It's not a part for a gun. Under the new definitions, this will now be a part for a gun, and you have to have a serial number on it. Right now you don't, and it's merely untraceable.
So was it hard for you to find a place to buy this part?
Not at all. All we did was Google, and we could have gone any number of places. There's a place in Pennsylvania. There's several places in Ohio. There's a place in Indiana, California, Texas, across the country. There are lots of companies, even California, where these are very restricted since 2018. I know they're in New York, New York State, New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. All have some laws addressing ghost guns. They're very different and disparate, but they have some laws. Even so, it's very easy to find a gun online anywhere. We even found a company up in the Northeast that were selling these parts.
Well, I got to ask you, how much did you pay for that? And what's the average cost to the maker of a ghost gun? And how much can you sell it for once you've made the whole piece?
Another great question, Marcia. You know, we bought this for less than $90. You can buy it. In fact, I got an email just last night wanting to sell me 10 of these. So if I wanted to make 10 or 20, they were selling it. It's like a fire sale, so to speak. They didn't call it that, but it was going out of business. They're clearly trying to unload these. You can buy parts for different kinds of guns. And by the way, this is for an AR-15. You can buy for a pistol, etc., anywhere from $100 to $500, $600. It doesn't take much to make one on a bench, as long as you have a drill and an auger to get this metal out. And then you can sell it on the street for 3 to 4 times that. This probably would go for as much as $2,000, $3,000 once I finished it up, if I were to do that.
You know, some of my sources tell me that, for a handgun, you maybe spend $500 on the parts. You could sell it for $1,500. Right. That's like a 300% markup. So I guess the question is getting a ghost gun cheaper than buying a gun in a regular store?
You know, that's another good question, but the truth is the people who want these guns, who are intending to do harm, who want them not traceable, they don't care about the price, because the fact is, I sell you this, Marcia, and then you go and shoot somebody and drop the gun on the ground. As long as you don't leave fingerprints, there's no way to trace it back to you or to me. And the criminal element, the gangs, people who know they want to use these guns illegally, they want guns like this that are untraceable. There's no way to trace the gun itself and where it came from originally. That's the power, or the scary part, about ghost guns.
See, I think what we should tell our viewers is that metal part is just the base, and what they do is use a 3D printer to make the parts that cover it.
Well, this is called a 80% lower, because anything more than this is considered a gun. They have other parts, and yes, a 3D printer can make this. I can tell you right now that most people who buy these kind of guns want the metal ones, because the 3D printed guns can be very inconsistent. Because they're made out of an epoxy, a polymer, so to speak, they can, when you fire them, they can be not as consistent as these guns. When you get this gun and put it together, and if you watch our story later on your TV channel there, you will see that it looks just like a regular gun. The only difference, doesn't have a serial number, no way to trace it back to where it came from.
So the law that goes into effect next week requires the gun parts like you have in your hand to have serial numbers, and people buying them have to have a background check in order to buy it.
That's exactly right.
What do your law enforcement sources say to you about how effective these two steps will be in stopping the flow of illegal guns, or at least ghost guns?
That's the million-dollar question, because the fact is the law enforcement sources say anything's going to help, because right now it's the wild, wild west. Again, you see how easy it was for us to buy it. There was no background check. They didn't care who I was. As long as I paid for it, they sent it to me, and now they're trying to get me to buy many more guns. They say, law enforcement sources that talk to me say, at least we're going to require the sellers, the ones in Ormond Beach or in Texas or in New Jersey who are selling these parts, to put a serial number on them. Will it stop the flow of these kind of guns? No. And in fact, you already alluded to it, Marcia. You said 3D printed guns. The criminal element, my sources are telling me, may in fact turn to 3D guns, because they won't be able to get these online as easily anymore, so they'll just make them at home. So there is still a concern it won't do enough to stop the flow of these illegal guns.
You know, the problem, though, with the 3D gun is that you need to have some kind of a metal part, because the bullet has to go through something that's metal.
That's right.
It's not going to, melt the plastic. But I guess the scariest part of your report is that there's what you call a fire sale going on now, people asking you to buy more parts, and people rushing to sell these parts before the law goes into effect. Do you have any information about how many people are taking advantage of these sales, and any idea if the people rushing to snap up these parts are in the metropolitan New York area?
It all depends on who you talk to. I was talking to special agent in charges up there in Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., and yes, in New Jersey. They're worried that we're talking about thousands of guns or gun parts that are flooding the streets, because these will be grandfathered in. If you get these parts between now and when the rule kicks in and you make your gun, you do not have to retroactively put the ghost gun, the serial number on them. So there's a real concern about that. Just a year ago, ATF recovered almost 20,000 unserialized ghost guns from crime scenes just last year, and that's a 1,000% increase from 5 years earlier. They're worried that many guns and more are flooding the streets between now and next Wednesday.
So you note in your piece that the people making these ghost guns sometimes are hobby people. I wonder what's to stop them from selling their guns to others who might simply scrape off the serial number and go about their business?
Great question. First of all, nothing. Nothing is to prevent a hobbyist who's doing it legitimately, like the two fellows that are in our piece do. Nothing is to stop them. Now, they follow the law, and they showed us how they follow the law, because under California law, now they have to put a serial number after they make the gun. They did that in our presence, so they are not breaking the law. But nothing is to stop some other hobbyist in Wisconsin or New York or wherever from doing just that. ATF hopes that those who follow the law will continue to do that. As for scraping off a serial number, it's a great question. You can do it, but it's very hard. I've been actually shown by experts at ATF in their lab there in the Washington, D.C. area, where a gun looks like it has no serial number, but they have a technique that they can, like when you're rubbing on a stone grave marker, for instance, or the Vietnam War memorial, and you are able to get the name to pop out. They're able to do something similar with chemicals and actually get the serial number to pop out. So while some people may think it's easy to just rub the serial number out, it's very, very difficult, because ATF can still recover even serial numbers that appear to have been rubbed completely off a gun.
So my police sources tell me that the biggest purchasers of these ghost guns seem to be gang members. Won't they find just other ways to get their weapons?
Absolutely. That's the concern, because, in fact, there are more guns than there are people in America right now. So close to 400 million guns and about 392 million people, give or take, depending on which sources you look at. So there is a real concern that these groups like gangs and criminal elements that want to use guns that are untraceable, or that guns that came from somewhere else, will find other sources. what the law enforcement sources tell me is at least we're trying, the community, the nation, is trying to address a problem that heretofore for the last 3 to 4 decades has literally seen no address at all. We've ignored the problem, and as you saw, it's grown 1,000% in just 5 years. That's a significant rise.
So, Stephen, you have a lot of sources in the law enforcement community across the country.
Yep.
Do they think that this will really dry up the number of ghost guns?
You know, it all depends on who you talk to, and this is a really interesting point. It all depends on where you live. In New York, in New Jersey, in Connecticut, Rhode Island, where there already are some very strict gun laws. In fact, it will send the criminal element looking other places, like Florida, Texas, Georgia, the iron pipeline, so to speak. They will find other sources. That's what worries law enforcement. But again, law enforcement says at least we're doing something, we, the law enforcement, to try to reduce the number in the hands of criminal elements. Obviously, the criminal element will find a way to find these guns. And in fact, what some law enforcement sources tell me, without getting into the politics of all this, because this is a very political issue, but they say what we need is a broad national policy, a national addressing of this problem of too many guns, more guns than people out there. And they say only until we do that will we really see a significant drop in the number of violent crimes in America. The guns are always going to be out there, but if there's at least a cohesive national policy, then there's at least a fighting chance, as one law enforcement source put it to me in California.
That leads me to my next question, because if the ghost gun market does dry up, does that mean that there'll be more reliance on the iron pipeline, people buying guns in states that sell them legally and importing them into New York and other places where the demand is really high?
My sources say that's a real concern, and that in fact, they don't believe the ghost gun market is going to dry up, but it is going to be reduced by this new law. They firmly believe that. There's other people who believe it's not going to do anything, that the criminals will find a criminal way to do things no matter what. They're not going to follow the rules. It'll hurt the hobbyists like Bob and Hugh, who we talked to in California, who already follow the rules and who obey the law. But they are really, my law enforcement sources are very concerned. That's exactly right. Again, because Texas and Florida laws and Georgia laws are much less restrictive than in New York, New Jersey. And so there will continue to be this iron pipeline supplying from, how shall I put it, less restrictive gun law states like the South to the Northeast, and that these guns will continue to flow that way. They're very concerned about that, and that the criminal element will find other ways to get their hands on these guns, including, as you mentioned, starting 3D printing and finding ways. You can go to a Home Depot and get a piece of metal that you can turn into a gun barrel. So there are ways to get around the rules. What my law enforcement sources tell me is at least the rules are now addressing what they had not addressed for 30 years.
So, like, based on your research and the officials you've spoken to, do you think the new laws will reduce the number of guns in circulation, total number of guns in circulation?
You know, my law enforcement sources tell me this. They do not believe in the next 10 to 20 years we're going to see a reduction in the number of guns in the United States. They just want to be able to say, we want more gun owners who have the Second Amendment right to own a gun, to follow the rules, and to act responsibly. That's every law enforcement source I talk to say it's not about restricting ownership of guns. It's about restricting the ownership of guns by criminals, by people who will do harm, who will hurt other people with them. The hobbyists, as Bob and Hugh, the people who like to collect firearms, they certainly have a right. Every law enforcement source tells me that. It's the irresponsible, it's the criminal element. They're trying to reduce that. And they say if these type of rule changes continue, they believe there will be a reduction in the next 10 or 20 years, but it's going to be a long haul in between. And they predict, unfortunately, one of them was very pessimistic about it. He predicted we're going to see more serious violence in New York City, in Baltimore, in Philadelphia, in Washington, D.C. between now and then. In fact, just to point out, even though you in New York City have strict gun laws there, and you have some laws that address ghost guns, there was a 1,447% increase in the number of ghost guns recovered from 2017 through 2021. That's a huge jump, even with the laws that are on the books.
Well, you just issued a warning to the so-called criminal element that you talked about by saying even if they try to scratch off or use acid or something to get the serial number off the gun, that ATF will find it anyway. So maybe it will have an effect on stopping the number of guns.
I don't know about issuing a warning. I've seen it happen, and I see that ATF is pretty good at tracing guns that appear to not even have serial numbers. If they have some type of serial number or marking, they're pretty good. They have real interesting technology. They can also trace bullets, shell casings through a system called NIBIN. They're very good and sophisticated. But again, as one law enforcement source told me in Washington, D.C., we're always one step behind the criminals. We need to get ahead of them.
Stephen Stock, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Marcia.